Okay, so for those that I haven't met before, my name is Claire Harrison. I'm the Managing Director of Harrison's. We're a Brisbane-based HR consulting firm. This topic obviously is hugely popular at the moment. I put out that message thinking that we had a few clients contacting us, and I think we've ended up with like 150 people registered to attend. So it is a short 20-minute session, so I will move through it quite quickly, and we won't be taking questions, but happy if you want to send me an email or connect with me in some way on LinkedIn or whatever to answer any questions that you may have post the session. So as promised, we will step through what the changes are and what exactly it is that you need to do to comply with the new changes to the Work Health and Safety Reg, especially as they relate to the Sexual Harassment Prevention Plan. So it's a requirement of all Queensland businesses at this stage that does come into play from the 1st of March 2025. Just before we get started, Harrison's is not a legal firm, therefore we're not giving any legal advice, and nor are we providing any specific advice that for your organisation or your specific situation. A little about Harrison's, but I'm guessing most of you know this given you're here and responded to us, is we've got 4 streams of the business. Consulting, so consulting can be anything from a small business set up in terms of compliance through to a larger organisational restructure, training, workplace investigations, leadership development, leadership coaching, anything that I suppose the HR team would normally do, but maybe lacking capacity or capability. Secondly is our HR team service, which we explain as being outsourced, insourced HR. So very suited to a business of 30 to a few hundred, where they have a growing business, but have decided to outsource HR instead of hire their own professional HR person, and they get an allocated consultant that works on site with them as their HR manager. Recruitment and onboarding, and My HR Experts is our online subscription service, which is currently being redeveloped and will relaunch within the month, I would hope. So in terms of what we're going to cover, we're going to talk about what is the legislation change, the consequences of non-compliance, and what's required. So what it is that you need to do to be compliant. So let's get started, starting with the legislation. So it's unique to Queensland, saying that if we've got organisations online that do employ people in Queensland or have workers in Queensland, it will cover you. So in a step of what has been described as nation leading, the Queensland government has introduced changes to the Work Health and Safety Regulation 2011, preventing sexual harassment and sex or gender-based harassment at work. So some of you may know that it came in 2 trenches. So the first one's already in play. It was back on the 1st of September 2024, which was about express obligations regarding the proactive management and prevention of risks to health and safety from sexual harassment and sex or gender-based harassment at work. Now we're talking about the 1st of March changes. So the largest part of those is the requirement to prepare a prevention plan to manage those identified risks. So while the Work Health and Safety Act Queensland and the reg in Queensland already contained obligations about psychosocial risks, these new changes expressly include sexual harassment and sex or gender-based harassment within that broader category of risk. So some of you would be well aware of that and have been doing your psychosocial risk assessments. So this specifically now has coverage for sexual harassment, which is new and unique to Queensland. So Queensland is the only jurisdiction in Australia to have these specific provisions in their work health and safety laws. So saying that, there are broad similarities to the positive duty to eliminate sexual harassment under federal discrimination laws and in some state discrimination laws such as Victoria. However, by Queensland putting them into the work health and safety laws, it increases the potential penalties, including criminal penalties, and expose boards and executives to charges for failure to exercise their due diligence in relation to these risks. So it, ups the ante when it comes to sexual harassment prevention. So just looking back, the changes that have already come into force, which were back in 1st of September 2024, expressly required the management of risk to health and safety from sexual harassment and sex or gender-based harassment at work. A specific sexual harassment risk assessment was required based on consultation with workforce, which as is the normal requirement for a work health and safety risk assessment. There was also a requirement to determine the control measures as part of risk assessment, and then review and, as necessary, revise control measures whenever there was a report received of sexual harassment or sex or gender-based harassment at work. So they're the changes that have already come into play back from the 1st of September 2024. But what we're looking at now, and is the area that requires the most work from the changes starting from the 1st of March 2025, is that organisations must prepare and implement a plan to manage identified risks to health and safety of workers or other persons from sexual harassment or gender-based harassment. So that's the prevention plan that we're talking about. So the new requirement applies to all businesses operating in Queensland, regardless of industry or size. Employers must take proactive steps to assess workplace risks and ensure compliance with the updated regs. WorkSafe have issued, hopefully you've all seen it, got a picture of it here, have issued a fact sheet about it. However, not all the templates have been published to assist businesses at this stage. Okay, so consequences, I've mentioned some of them in terms of board and executives. So it is important to get it right, given the significant downside of non-compliance. A failure to prepare, implement or review a prevention plan will expose a business to civil penalties, whether or not any sexual harassment actually occurs. So each of the steps, i.e. preparation, implementation, and reviewing, may be treated as a separate failure. So with each failure amounting to a maximum fine of 60 penalty units, which is currently equal to $9,678. In addition, failure to comply with the new sexual harassment prevention plan requirements can also result in other significant consequences, including other fines and legal consequences under the work health and safety laws for not implementing the plan, but also for breaches of the Work Health and Safety Act if there is a substantiated case of sexual harassment or assault, and there are high consequences, as we know, for officers under the Act, which includes managers, executives and board directors who are not being proactive in identifying and preventing risk within their organisations, and those penalties do include criminal convictions, personally being held liable. There's also an increased liability in case of sexual harassment claims under various other jurisdictions, such as Workers' Compensation, the Discrimination Act and the Fair Work Act. Not to mention the reputational damage and potential loss of business credibility. So think recent WiseTech boss Richard White's high-profile cases of sexual harassment and bullying and the damage that caused on the share price to the organisation. And BHP's 103 substantiated cases in one financial year involving a formal company apology and costly legal settlements. We do not want to see it on the front page of the Courier Mail. Okay, so what is it that's required? So under the new regs, as I said, the area requiring the most work from employers from the changes starts on the 1st of March 2025. And that is that organisations must prepare and implement a plan to manage identified risks to health and safety of workers or other persons from sexual harassment or gender-based harassment, being the prevention plan. So under these new regs, a business must formally assess and manage the risks of sexual harassment in the workplace. They must implement effective control measures to prevent the harassment. They must develop a written sexual harassment prevention plan that outlines policies, procedures and actions to address and mitigate these harassment risks. And they must consult with employees and leadership teams to ensure a comprehensive and tailored approach for their business or organisation. And they must, under the legislation, regularly review and update the plan at least every 3 years, or when a new risk or a case actually happens. So what actions should you take right now? So you need to learn about the nature, the drivers and impacts of sexual harassment in your workplace, and how to identify the risk of sexual harassment and sex or gender-based harassment at your workplace. Consider worker, workplace or work environment characteristics specific to your organisation that may increase the risk of sexual harassment. Example, low worker diversity or power imbalances. You must recognise that sexual harassment is both a HR and a safety issue and requires collaboration with your workers and a systems thinking approach to health, safety and well-being. You must, really important, is to provide your people leaders and your rehab or return to work coordinators with the right training so they have the skills and confidence to prevent and to respond with empathy and support to the emotional needs of workers who have experienced sexual harassment. But importantly, what this legislation is about is really about the preventative measures so that sexual harassment doesn't happen in the workplace, rather than that reactive of when it happens, what do we do? So it's a very proactive focused change to the legislation. So in regards specifically to the sexual harassment prevention plan, it must be in writing. It must state each identified risk. It must identify control measures implemented or to be implemented to manage each of those identified risks. It must identify the matters considered in determining the control measures, including those that are in the reg, but there will be others. Describe the consultation undertaken in line with the Act. It must be set out in a way that is readily accessible and understandable to all workers. That may include translating for your workers, depending on your workforce. It must set out the procedure for dealing with reports of unsafe conduct. The prevention plan, as I mentioned, it must be reviewed as soon as practicable after a report of sexual harassment or sex or gender-based harassment at work is made, as soon as practicable after a health and safety rep or committee ask for the plan to be reviewed, or otherwise at least every 3 years. Reasonable steps must be taken to make workers aware of the prevention plan and how to access it. So, how to be compliant. So what you need to do to remain compliant is assess your current workplace policies, identify gaps in addressing sexual harassment risks, develop a compliant sexual harassment prevention plan in consultation with leadership and workers. You must utilise resources and expert guidance to ensure your plan meets legal requirements, and hopefully WorkSafe will soon release more information, including a template prevention plan. And you must implement ongoing monitoring and updates to remain compliant beyond the 1 March deadline. So let's look at how to create specifically the sexual harassment prevention plan. So this is based on advice from the Victorian Equal Opportunity Human Rights Commission, because Queensland haven't provided resources at this stage. Their step-by-step approach, and I should say, so that's non-discrimination legislation, not work health and safety, but at the moment it's a really good guide for us. Their step-by-step approach focuses on primary prevention, secondary prevention and tertiary prevention by looking at the drivers, the risks and responses as a best practice. So let's look a little bit further at that. So what we look at here, which is step 1, is the drivers, risks and gaps. So those of you who are across the work health and safety legislation and risk assessment would really, completely understand this model, because we use it for everything else in work health and safety, but also especially around bullying and the psychosocial hazards. So you would have seen this. So it's about identifying the drivers of sexual harassment. So some drivers may include or are the gender inequality, power dispute and roles, racism, homophobia. It's about identifying the risks to the workplace or industry. Example, travel, overnight stays. It's about identifying the gaps and responses to sexual harassment, example, inadequate incident reporting system, a gap in leadership knowledge or lack of training of how to prevent and respond. So your existing work health and safety policy should contain a risk assessment framework that will apply here. So this is, a sample of a fairly typical risk management model. So then step 2 is about responding to the drivers. So consultation is a key component of developing your sexual harassment prevention plan. So you must consult with workers to address the drivers, the risks and the gaps, and identify any additional risks that you've missed. Consultation is a requirement, underpins the whole process, so really important. Then these actions and measures will inform the prevention plan that you will be developing. So just as an example here, so if we're looking at stage 1, which is about the identification of potential scenarios where sexual harassment could occur. So this is looking at the area of hazard or the driver potentially, the description of what that is, back one, the potential risk and the affected groups within your organisation. So this is an example, stage 1 of identifying the hazards, potential scenarios. Stage 2 is then the scenario risk level assessment. So you'll see down the bottom is the keys, which are very typical. I'm sure most of you are using for work health and safety risk assessments. So this one looks at what is the risk, what's the likelihood, what's the impact, and therefore what is the risk rating. And then we look at what are the control measures that we can use and that potential risk rating. Stage 3 are the preventative measures, so the risk area and then the control measures. And then once we've done all of that, we can start to put together our action plan in terms of what it is that needs to be done, who's responsible, a deadline, and the status and ongoing we manage that. So that is the risk management framework that we'll need to look at using, which feeds into that action plan. Okay, so in terms of looking at what to include in the sexual harassment prevention plan, we'd start with background, which is to outline sexual harassment in your workplace. What does sexual harassment mean for your workplace? Where can it occur? What impacts can it have on workers? How can sexual harassment be prevented? Why are we writing the plan? What will it do? Second is legal framework. So the legal framework that applies to your organisation. Obviously, we're looking at the reg, but depending on what other states you're in, there might be other legislation, including discrimination, that may be covered here. The drivers that outline what the drivers of sexual harassment are in your workplace. Some drivers, like I mentioned, include gender inequality, power disputes in roles, racism, homophobia, but what are the specific drivers in your workplace? Then we look at the policies, training that are in your organisation that address these drivers, including the reporting procedures. They might be internal strategic plans, strategies that you have in place already for addressing inequality in the workplace. But what are the existing strategies that you have in place? Risks we've just spoken about, but complete the risk assessment like what we just talked about of your workplace and detail the results, identifying likelihood, risks, control measures within that. The response, so the control measures, consultation, like I said, is a key component. Actions, you're going to develop that action plan. And then that ongoing, how are we going to evaluate an ongoing monitoring of the plan? That all needs to go into that plan. Then we need to implement the plan. So it needs to be clearly communicated. It needs to be available. We're going to measure and monitor the success of the implementation. And then we also, like we already covered, is we need to have that ongoing review and updates as required. So what should you be doing now? So all organisations in Queensland should be taking the following actions now to ensure compliance with this new legislation. So revisit or commence a standalone sexual harassment and related conduct risk assessment. Ensure that the consultation with the workforce that feeds into the assessment is recent. Review your control measures and consider what else is required. Ensure you have a clear reporting process for workers in relation to sexual harassment and other related conduct, and remind your workers of that process. Determine how you will update the risk assessment and control measures after receiving complaints or identifying issues. Confirm your training is up to date relating to appropriate workplace behaviour, and that all workers in your business, including contractors, subcontractors, apprentices, volunteers, understand the standard of behaviour that's required. Commence work right now, if you haven't already, on your prevention plan. Many of the steps that are earlier in this list will feed into that prevention plan. Update your officer due diligence reporting to ensure sexual harassment and other similar unlawful conduct risks are appropriately addressed, and that the board and the executive in particular are properly briefed on these changes in the legislation. So how Harrison's can help, we've got two packages that I'd like to talk to you about today because we know it's it's a significant piece of work that needs to be undertaken. It's got a very tight deadline, and there's limited resources available. So this first package is a DIY. So if you're keen to do it yourself, we will provide to you all of these resources. So a sexual harassment prevention plan template. I've got an asterisk there. So we will give you the one that we have developed, but as soon as one is available, we will also share that with you as well, or let you know where it is once hopefully WorkSafe provide us with one. We will provide to you a sexual harassment and sexual assault workplace audit tool. To undertake that assessment, we will provide a risk assessment template specifically to this issue. We will provide you with a focus group presentation PowerPoint template, because that is part of the consultation process, as well as a discussion guide to go with that. We'll also provide you with a worker sexual harassment and sexual assault experience survey. Again, you need to show and undertake consultations. So that's another way that we recommend that you would do it. We will provide you with a sexual harassment and sexual assault policy template. And we will also provide you with a sexual harassment awareness training PowerPoint template. So that is the package. If you decide to do that today, then we've got the special offer of the price that's on the screen. Secondly, if that's all a bit hard, you don't have the resource, whatever it might be, then we have more of the we'll do it for you package. So that package includes us conducting the workplace audit, includes us facilitating the focus group. It includes Harrison's facilitating the survey. From there, we will develop a customised policy for your organisation. Based on that information, we complete the risk assessment, and from there, we will provide you with a customised implementation plan for your customised sexual harassment prevention plan. From there, we are able to deliver training on sexual harassment prevention, as well as relating conduct and behaviour issues for your employees, your managers and your board, and then ongoing support, whether or not that be advice, workplace investigations, annual reviews of your policies and your plan. So for today, what we're offering is we will do all of steps 1 to 7 for the fee on the screen, plus those additional, and also the training we can deliver at those prices today. But understanding we have consultants ready to go now to help you with this to meet the deadline, but obviously we can only take on so many in this package. So that is just an offer that we're putting up for today. So if you want to take it up, then you need to email us. So there's the option 1 that if you want to do it yourself. Option 2 is we will do for you. The special pricing is for today. So if you want to get started, then email us and we'll book in that kickoff meeting. But like I say, it's for 5 p.m. today. So I hope that was useful, and I really thank you for your time, and good luck with developing your sexual harassment prevention plans. Thank you.